Greetings all, this is Rick Levine with your May astrological forecast. It's hard to believe that it's May. We made it through April somehow. What a month April was, and quite frankly, May is going to be another astrological doozy. So, before I get into the actual forecast, I first just want to thank all of you for participating here on my YouTube channel. Last month we had over 70,000 views, and obviously it would not have been possible without you, obviously, I say. And without all of you who actually support this work on Patreon. And if you're not familiar with Patreon and my offerings there, feel free to check out my page on patreon.com/Rick Levine. And while I'm on this thought, and I never really do this, take a moment and subscribe to this channel here on YouTube. It does help us stay in touch. And speaking of staying in touch, I'm also wanting to invite you, if you haven't already, to jump over to my page, my webpage, ricklevineastrologer.com, and subscribe to my email list there. Even if you're already following me here on YouTube, even on Instagram or on Facebook, it just takes a minute or two. And this is your way to be sure that you are informed of not only the most astrologically significant happenings, but also to make sure you're notified of my YouTube videos when they become available and other astrological happenings. And I do promise that you won't be overwhelmed with frequent, or maybe that's all too frequent, emails selling you something or another. I won't do that. Rather, the email list is my way to be sure that I don't lose touch with you, because I have, and many others have also, lost connections with people online, whether it's through YouTube or Instagram or Facebook, because of loss of connection there. As some of you know, I had my Instagram account stolen a couple of years ago and overnight lost 20,000 connections with some of you. Now, I assume if you're here, you've reestablished those connections. But in order to encourage you to join my email list, as I also announced last month, I'm doing an introductory natal chart interpretation for harmonic aspects. That's going to be, once a month. And I'm going to be drawing these names randomly out of the email list. Actually, I'm happy to announce that we actually have our first winner. And our first winner for the free harmonic aspect natal chart reading for this month goes to Gianna McDermott. And Gianna's name was actually selected by my assistant Gail using software that generates random numbers that are matched up with those on my email list. So congratulations, Gianna. Or Gianna, I'm not sure how you say your name. You'll receive an email in the next few days with instructions on how to get this. And I encourage you to go to ricklevineastrologer.com and sign up for the email list, and I will draw another one on the 1st of next month. So, that being said, I also want to thank all of you who attended the Jupiter-Uranus event that I did with Steve Judd last month, actually on April 20th. It was an overwhelming success. In order to stream this event live to both my YouTube channel and Steve's at the same time, we used a broadcast platform called StreamYard that's a lot more flexible than Zoom, which I've been using for my regular monthly astrology night events. And I'm going to be using StreamYard for this month's astrology night. Because it's not only a lot more flexible, but it'll make watching it a lot more pleasant. And this month's astrology night is on Friday, May 3rd, and that's at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. For those of you in the Seattle area, I hope to see you. And for those of you who aren't, you can go to my YouTube channel, and I will have an actual link here below that will connect you to the page that will be the live Ustream, the live YouTube live stream on Friday, May 3rd at 6:30 p.m. Seattle time. And also, I want to make sure that you know that the following month I'm going to be out of town. I'll be off to New York for a couple of conferences that I'll tell you about in just a moment. But what that means is that instead of Astrology Night being on the first Friday night of June, it's going to be on the last day of May. So there'll be an Astrology Night on Friday, May 3rd, and again on Friday, May 31st, we'll do the June Astrology Night on the night before June 1st. So that's what's coming up for Astrology Night. And by the way, if you didn't get a chance to watch the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction live stream, it's available on my YouTube channel, and the clickable link will be down below in the comment section. What I'll do is I'll pin a comment, so it'll be the first comment below, and not only will the clickable link for the Jupiter-Uranus video be there, but all the other events that I'll mention, that I have mentioned or will mention, will also be in that first comment below. And, by the way, I should also mention that that we now are actually putting chapter locations on the comments. Actually, it'll be on the bottom of the description, so that this normally takes a day or two to get up, but my video assistant Sam is actually putting together chapter locations. And for many of you who like to either skip some of this introductory stuff or later on come back to this and go to a particular day. Let's say you just want to go to May 17th or to May 24th. There'll be chapter headings at the very bottom so that you can call this back up and then click on those chapter links, and they will take you directly to the piece in the longer video where I'm talking about that. So that's that. A couple of upcoming events. We will get to the to the material here in just a moment. But I will be speaking at the Tucson Astrologers Guild on May 10th and 11th. And if you're in the Tucson area, check out the TucsonAstrologersGuild.org. I'll be doing a Friday night talk there on astrology in the 21st century, and then a Saturday workshop on astrological consultations, the art of doing consultations. While I'm in Arizona, on Monday night, May 13th, I'm going to be doing a special event at Apotheca, which is a venue in Sedona, and it's the topic for that night is going to be sacred geometry and the music of the spheres, and it's going to really delve into how we are revisioning astrology in modern times. And this is going to be a really fun event. It's limited to 60 people. It will most likely sell out. The link again will be down below. There's a direct link to where you can find out all the details about the event and even purchase a ticket so that you don't get turned away at the door, which is certainly a possibility. That'll be on Monday, May 13th in Sedona. Then the following Friday, I will be back in Tucson at Cosme, and Cosme is what is it? It's a gathering that occurs. It's a venue, a space in Tucson, and that'll be at 5 p.m. on Friday, May 17th, and we'll be talking about, again, astrology in these days and what has happened in astrology over the past couple of several decades, and it'll just kind of be a community discussion about astrology and where it's at in the big picture of things. And I hope some of you can come by to that. Again, attendance to that is limited also. And that's part of the Cosme monthly podcasts. And so even if you can't make the event, the podcasts are still available. That brings us up to May 23rd through the 27th, which is Memorial Day weekend. And that is the 40th annual NORWAC that's back here in Seattle. And the actual event itself is sold out in the real world, but it is still available virtually. And as I've said here before, NORWAC does virtual conferences amazingly. And so if you are not attending physically, you still can attend online, and information on that can be found on their website, norwac.net. And I'll be doing 2 talks during the conference itself, and I'll be doing a post-conference, again, on hands-on natal chart interpretation, getting to the core of the matter in real time. And again, this is about taking chart readings to the next level, whether you do it professionally or for fun or are just kind of learning how to read charts. And even if you're not registered for the conference, if you live in and around the Seattle area, you can attend the Monday, that's Monday on Memorial Day, Monday, May 27th, and it'll be at 10 a.m. at the Doubletree Suites at SeaTech. And you can find out more information on that and register for that in advance online. And that'll be on Monday, May 27th, a post-conference on NORWAC. And NORWAC is always a lot of fun. And if you are someone who watches these YouTube videos or a patron, please come up to me, introduce yourself, and let me know, because I love to meet some of you in real time that I've never met, and of course see some of you again that haven't seen for a while. Now, the reason why I won't do astrology night on the 1st of June is that I'll be heading off to New York to participate in a weekend workshop at the Omega Institute, which is in Rhinebeck, New York, just north of New York City. And this is entitled Humanity Rising in the Leo Aquarius Age. And I'll be joined by Lynn Bell, Maurice Fernandez, Amir Bey, sound healer Valerie Weir, and Linda Tucker coming up from South Africa, the keeper of the sacred white lions, that tradition in South Africa. And we'll be talking a bit about how the age of Aquarius is really not just Aquarius. It's an axis of Leo and Aquarius, hence the white lion and the return of that mythical being, which has actually returned. And so, information on that is available online, and that requires advanced registration also. I'll see some of you there. If you've never been to Omega Institute, don't miss an opportunity. It is a magical, beautiful place, and this will be the 4th year that there is this astrology conference there, and I'm looking forward to being there again. It's one of my favorite places to teach. The following weekend, that's on Saturday, June 15th, I'll be up in Boston at the NCGR that meets at the Belmont Community Center. Again, information and links for all these events will be in the pinned comments below. But that event on Saturday afternoon from 1 to 5 p.m. is basically, it's a relationship workshop, and it's beyond Venus and Mars. Of course, romantic relationship models have traditionally centered on gender-based roles of Venus and Mars, but we're going to explore the multidimensionality of modern lifestyles and how astrology has changed along with the cultural norms that we're all processing and moving through. And we're going to look here at synastry and composite and midpoint charts and various timing tools also. So it's going to be a deep dive into the relationships, and not just romantic relationships, but parent-child relationships, sibling relationships, employer-employee relationships, and so on. I'll see some of you there. And then just very, very quickly, a little bit further down the road, but I'll be at the in the UK at the Astrological Association conference, and that's an annual conference. This is the 56th annual conference. The title of that conference is Diverse Perspectives, All Themes Considered, and this is going to be at a beautiful conference venue up near Leicester, or maybe about a half-hour drive from Birmingham, and this will be the weekend of August 28th through September 1st. I'll be doing a pre-conference event for that conference and a talk on the conference itself. Then in a busy year for me. And then in October, I'll be participating in the OPA. OPA is the organization for professional astrology. And this conference is Awakening, Celebrating the Aquarian Shift. And it's going to be an amazing conference. It'll include stargazing with Gemini Brett. You'll get to choose a track of intimate groups that are limited to 6 to 9 or 10 people. And you pick one group to be with and to work with for 3 days. The conference will also include a banquet, daily yoga, and there's going to be one first day of plenary sessions where everyone's going to be together. I'll be doing a talk on that day. But then you actually get to pick an astrologer that you work with in this small intimate group for 3 days. And those track leaders will include Lynn Bell, Gemini Brett, Ann Orderly, Sam Reynolds, Christopher Renstrom, Moon Zlotnick, Kira Sutherland, and Donna Young, and myself. And so you can read about what each of these people will be offering, and it'll be small group, intense work with those people. And again, I'll be one of those track leaders. Kay Taylor, the president of OPA, will be doing a consulting skills training. And then there will be peer groups that are part of the OPA peer supervision modeling system. And those groups will be led by Arlen Weiss and Jeannie Picasso and Alexandra Caracosta and Louise Eddington. And these groups will all be small groups. It's a very exciting way to do a conference, and I'll see some of you there. Now, last and certainly not least is the fact that I will be back in Goa, India, November 23rd through December 4th. This will likely fill up. This is going to be 11 days, actually 12 days, of full immersion astrological experience in the magical and beautiful and spiritual area of South Goa, India. I'm not going to speak a whole lot more about this right now. Some of you have heard me talk about this, but this is sponsored by Heaven and Earth Workshops. I've done, I don't know how many workshops, 10, 15 workshops with them since 2006. And you can go to their site for, and again, the link will be down below, but the curriculum, the day-by-day schedule, including all kinds of cool activities, everything is taken care of from the time you land in India to the time you get back on the airplane. It's just an amazing and magical experience, and I'm looking forward to being back at Bhakti Kutir, which is an Ayurvedic healing spa, just a very short walk down to a magical and swimmable beach in the south of Goa. So that's it for now. I know that was a lot, but I really feel like it's important to understand the larger perspective of what's going on and what I'm up to. And I know some of you, certainly do like to stay in touch with those things. And I encourage you, whether it's coming to one of my individual retreats or events or attending an astrological conference of one sort or another, it really changes how we look and work with astrology, getting the information both directly from one person, or in the case of the conferences like NORWAC or Omega or the OPA conference or the AA conference in England. It's just amazing to be amongst a group of people. But of course, I have a pile of planets in the 11th house, so you would expect that I would enjoy those kinds of venues. So there we are, and now let's shift gears and talk about what is coming up for the month of May. You know, it's these there's that saying that may you live in interesting times, or when they talk about there are incredible times that are coming up, times of great change. Well, as the Hopi elders say, these are those times now. We are living through just an unbelievable time, a time that maybe has never quite, humanity has never quite experienced on this level, partly because of the technology of having everyone on the globe connected intimately with everyone else. And it's really changed the nature of astrology and what happens, because had we lived a couple 100 years ago, now really 150 years ago or more, there was no such thing as instantaneous communication. It would take days, weeks, months, even sometimes years for the news of an event that happened in one place in the world to get to some other place. And now when something happens, it's like instantaneously, it's like lightning striking. And this is both the magic and the overwhelming aspect of electronic and now digital communication. It's what happens anywhere on the planet, whether it's on a college campus anywhere on the planet, or whether it's in Sudan or in Congo or in Gaza or in China. It doesn't matter. When something happens, we know about it all over the planet. And that's part of what's happening. But also, of course, part of what's happening is just the incredible shifts that have begun really back in the 1960s with the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, and then again in the late 80s, early 90s with the Saturn-Uranus-Pluto, Saturn-Neptune-Uranus conjunctions. And then in the 2012 to 2015, but really in the 2020s, when we had the Uranus-Pluto square kind of reactivating all that stuff that happened at the Uranus-Pluto conjunctions in the mid-60s. And then as we got to January of 2020, and we experienced the overwhelmingly intense year 2020 of the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction with Pluto, that is really what's at play now, because Pluto now has moved out of Capricorn and into Aquarius, where this triple alignment, even actually quadruple if you count the fact that it was not just a Jupiter-Saturn-Pluto conjunction, but it was also aligned with the nodal axis too. Pretty amazing period of time, and we certainly don't need to replay the January, February, March, April of 2020. But in many ways, as Pluto moved into Aquarius back about a year ago, back in March of 2023, we began to move into new territory, and we began to first get our first overwhelm of AI, which is now kind of speeded up now that Pluto has moved back into Capricorn and now back into Aquarius. But Pluto becomes an amazingly important key player this month, because Pluto actually is stationary at the beginning of the month. And, unlike Mercury, when it turns direct or stationary, it stations for a few hours, for even a day or so, but then it picks up momentum pretty quickly in a few days. Well, at the beginning of the month, Pluto is on the first day of the month, on May 1st. Pluto is at 2 degrees of Aquarius and 6 minutes. By the way, I'm recording this on the evening of April of April 30th or 31st. I forget. Yeah, April. 30 days has September, April, June, and November. I'm recording this on the evening of April 30th. But on May 1st, Pluto is at 2 degrees Aquarius and 6 minutes. By the end of the month, on June 1st, actually, the beginning of next month, Pluto is at 1 degree Aquarius, 54 minutes. In other words, although Pluto officially turns retrograde on May 2nd, the fact of the matter is that it's at 2 degrees and 6 minutes on the first day of the month, and it's 2 degrees and 6 minutes still on May 10th. It takes over a week for Pluto, even though it's technically retrograde, for it to move 1/60th of a degree. So when a planet moves slow or slowly, it holds more energy. It has less speed but greater momentum. It has more inertia, and which is why the moon, which moves so quickly, in some ways, although it can trigger events, it doesn't power the chronos, the chronic events of Saturn and the outer trans-Saturnian planets. So when you have a slow-moving planet like Pluto, that's always overwhelmingly potent and powerful, and it grinds to a halt, turning retrograde. And remember, Pluto is going to retrograde back into Capricorn September, all of October, November during the American election, presidential election, and then it'll move back into Aquarius in December, where it stays for nearly a couple of decades. So Pluto is a key player this month. Pluto is a key player since it's moved into Aquarius, and we're still just dipping our toes into that Aquarian pond where the ripples are going to be building for years to come. And remember, it's significant that the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction back on April 20th, which, remember, is a slow enough conjunction, a slow enough moving pattern that those ripples will build for weeks, months, and even years. And so it's not about what happens on that date. It's the energy that's opened, the doorway, the portal that opens, that we begin to walk through. And of course, it's not lost on me, and I hope on others, that Jupiter is not only the planet that's related to foreign events, foreign travel, but anything from afar. It's also related to the big ideas that are taught at universities, philosophies, ideas that go beyond our normal way of everyday interaction, communicating, or thinking. And that Jupiter is the planet that's connected with universities, with colleges and universities and higher education. As Jupiter aligns with Uranus, Jupiter magnifies or opens up the Uranian energy, and Uranus is about radical shift. It's about not only technological breakthrough, but it's also about revolt, revolution, rebellion. It's about innovation. It's about going against the status quo in kind of a quantum jump of sudden awakening, Uranus the Awakener. And the reason why I'm dwelling on this, even though this is is a forecast for May. This energy is holding with us all through May and setting something up in May that's incredibly potent, that's not only potent for now and through May, but will be through June and actually will be for the year or two ahead. And here's what I'm talking about. Uranus in modern astrology is related to Aquarius. Since Pluto is now in Aquarius, we look at Uranus as kind of resonating or buzzing the energy that it's sending off to Pluto in Aquarius. And when Jupiter magnified Uranus by conjunction toward the end of April, middle end of April of 2024, this was the first time that Jupiter and Uranus aligned since Pluto was moving through Uranus's modern home sign of Aquarius since 1789. And when Jupiter and Uranus aligned in 1789 with Pluto having just moved into Aquarius, that was the year that the United States Constitution was ratified. That was the first session of the U.S. Congress. That was when the U.S. Congress established the United States judicial system. It was also, the conjunction occurred within a couple of weeks of the storming of the Bastille, which was arguably the turning point of the French Revolution, which was the time when the masses of individuals, Uranus, basically overtook the Jupiterian structure of royalty ruling a country. And all I can say is that what we're seeing in the United States in particular, well, not even in particular, around the world, because these demonstrations that are occurring in the name of anti-colonialism or for Palestine around the world, regardless of what your individual personal and or political views are, there's something happening here that's on a much greater level than we can appreciate in this moment. And it's into this environment that May opens. And I'm sorry that the prologue was so important, but we need to understand that sometimes when we look at the astrology of a chart in a given moment, we think that everything's focused on that moment. And everything in astrology resonates, harmonizes with a flow of waves. Remember, the planets aren't points in space. They look that way, they appear that way when we look at them, but planets are waves. Time flows like a wave, like light travels like a wave. But when we measure light, it's a particle. Time flows like a wave, but when we measure it, it's an event. And so we see these events, but they're part of larger flows. And enough said on that. I really want to focus in on now what's going on. But I do want to point out that there are some major events in May. There's a lot of planetary movement. All the planets are moving direct except Pluto, which is now the counterpoint. It's holding that position for the entire month of May. It's almost like everything right now needs to answer in one way or another to Pluto. And I think it's important to note that during the month of May, Jupiter, which you remember aligned with Uranus being the planet associated with Aquarius and Pluto in Aquarius. Okay, so that on May 25th, Jupiter changes signs out of Taurus, where it leaves Uranus still for another year, and Jupiter moves into Gemini. Now, when Jupiter changes signs, this is always important, but this time round, it's even more important, and I'll tell you why. Because when Jupiter moves from Taurus into Gemini on the afternoon of May 25th, it will be within a couple of degree orb of its trine to Pluto. And its trine to Pluto is not exact until June 2nd. But that's right around the bend astrologically. It's just beyond May. But the thing is that we know Pluto is holding a very important position, being in Aquarius. We know that that door has been opened as Jupiter lined up with Uranus, but over the next month and a few days, Jupiter will not only move into Gemini and change the energy, but it will create a trine with Pluto. And remember, it was Jupiter's conjunction with Pluto back in 2020 that was so aligned with the craziness that we experienced as governmental shutdown, quarantine, vaccination, COVID, that whole scenario. And there's another piece that is incredibly potent and important in May, and that is that on May 6th, which is right around the bend from the opening of May, we're feeling this energy now. I mentioned this in the April forecast because this was already being felt in April. But on May 6th, Saturn perfects a semisquare to Pluto. Now, we'll look at this chart. We'll look at all the charts in just a moment. But remember, a semisquare, which is a half square, half square, is not like a weak square. It's like a laser-focused disruption that kind of can throw a monkey wrench or a spanner in the gears or in the works. That depends on which side of the Atlantic you live on. A spanner in the works or a monkey wrench in the gears. There's something happens that forces not a resolution, but a conflict to come to the surface, and it motivates action. And we'll talk more about this in just a moment. But this Saturn square Pluto is so significant because it's the first disruption to the Saturn conjoined Pluto, which occurred back in 2020, which basically stopped everything that we thought we knew was going on in these times, and ties into a whole sequence of other events that actually have a lot to do with the Mideast conflict going. And again, I'll put this link below in case you haven't seen it. I don't want to delve too deeply here, but I do have a YouTube presentation that will be linked to in the first pinned comment that is a discussion of the history of the Saturn-Pluto cycle, because it's tied to the creation of the World Zionist organization at the Saturn-Pluto opposition in 1898. It's tied to the origins of World War I in 1914, 1915, and that period of time was incredibly important. Actually, in 1914, within a couple of weeks of the assassination of Duke Ferdinand and the beginning of World War I, but it was the Saturn-Pluto half square in 1918. Actually, that was within a few weeks of the armistice, of the ending of World War I on November 11th, just a couple of months after the exact semisquare of Saturn and Pluto. But this was also the height of the flu epidemic. 50 million people died from the flu epidemic around that period of time. It was also the height of the Russian Revolution and the Civil War, 1918 to 1920. So I'm just pointing out that these half squares are very, very potent. It's also important, though, to note that at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 1948, this was right around, though the conjunction was in 47, in 46, 47, and 48 is when the UN was founded and when Israel actually was created legally. But it was also, interestingly enough, at a Saturn-Pluto square in 1922, within a few weeks of President Harding signing a resolution that was for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. So we have an event right now on May 6th that ties to these other historic events. In fact, at the last Saturn-Pluto conjunction, that occurred in 1982. And in 1982, of course, that was the year that Israel invaded Lebanon. So we have a bit of history that, although we're looking at events that are occurring right now, that they are part of a larger timeline sequence. And again, if you haven't watched it already, I'm going to suggest you watch the in-depth dive of the Saturn-Pluto cycle that is on YouTube. But this is a huge event, and in fact, it is the first of three because of the direct retrograde direct on May 5th, actually May 5th, May 6th. The exact conjunction occurs on the west coast of the United States early in the morning, which means that it will, it depends on where you are on the planet as to whether it's on the 5th or the 6th. Okay, so let's look at a chart for the opening day of May. The first thing we notice when we look at this chart is that we can see that Mars and Venus have just changed signs. Mars moved into Aries on April 30th, and Venus entered Taurus on April 29th. The reason why these are highly significant is that Venus has just completed a square to Pluto. We can see, although this was exact on April 30th, at noon on May 1st, we can see that Venus is still partile square to Pluto, which is stationary retrograde. And this is very, very powerful because we know that when planets have made angles to Pluto, going back to the October 6th, 7th, when Mars was squaring Pluto, all the way up to the most recent events, that every time Pluto gets annoyed or irritated or stressed by another planet, we see a flare-up in what's going on here. And so we notice that on May 1st, that not only is Venus creating a square to Pluto, but Mars is moving into a sextile to Pluto. That's not exact till May 3rd. We'll get there in just a moment. But I want to focus here on Saturn, which is actually making that half square to Pluto. That's not exact yet for a couple of days, but the Venus half square to Saturn on the other side is already in effect done, but it's really, really still close. It's still just 1 degree of orb. And so we have this stress tension of Saturn making a half square to Pluto on one side and a half square to Venus on the other. And this is certainly heightening these issues to a great level of anxiety and really forcing us to reevaluate. Evaluate is a good word because Venus is about values, and to look at what it is that's important and what do we want out of this. And Saturn, the structure in Pisces, it's hard to really put our finger on what it is we need to do in order to find resolution here. And this is a very tricky situation. So here on May 1st, we can see that the moon is in Aquarius, and yet the most important thing, I think, is really the Venus square to Saturn. The Venus semisquare Saturn and the Venus square to Pluto, with Saturn coming into that semisquare. This is incredibly stressful and will be with us for a few days. As we move to the second, we can see that the moon moves into Pisces. The moon enters Pisces at 11:51 in the morning. Again, all these times are Pacific time. And the moon moving into Pisces over the next couple of days, that moon is going to conjoin both Saturn and Neptune. Notice that Mars is already out of Pisces. It's already done its conjunction with Saturn and Neptune, but the moon will swing through that over the next couple of days, reactivating some of those issues. As we get to the 3rd, Pluto again has not moved. It's still at 2 degrees and 6 minutes, even though technically it's retrograde. Practically, it's stationary. But on the 3rd, we see that the sun now makes a half square to Neptune, and that half square to Neptune is important because it's hard to get clarity on what's going on. No matter how much we focus in, it's like the more we focus in, the more detail we get, the fuzzier the cloud becomes. It's very, very difficult to get resolution here. It's very frustrating, and that's heightened by the fact that Mars and Aries now, we want to go somewhere. We want to do something. We're feeling like there's oomph behind our punch, whether it's physical or metaphysical. We want resolution, and yet Neptune at 29 degrees of Pisces, this is the anaretic degree. It's ripe with change because it's moving into Aries, but it doesn't get there for a year because it's going to go retrograde. And so this is highly frustrating because we want resolution and yet we're not getting it. And I think that the sun's half square to Neptune on the 3rd is going to exacerbate that even more. On the 4th, on Saturday, the moon actually enters Aries at 1:40 p.m. And the reason why this is significant is that just before that, I think the confusion, the uncertainty, the misdirection, the misleading energy, the deception will come to a height early on Saturday, late Friday night or on Saturday, when the moon actually aligns with Neptune. And then as it goes into Aries by Saturday afternoon, there's movement, and that moon is moving toward a conjunction with Mars that will reach that conjunction by later in the day on Saturday, and so this is a very significant switch, even though there's no major outer planet perfections. Again, note though that the Saturn half square to Pluto is now within 9 minutes of orb. That's like less than a sixth of a degree. And so that is building even more. But remember that these outer planet cycles, like Saturn semi-square to Pluto, which I mentioned actually occurs 3 times. I think I didn't give you the date. The first time is exact on May 6th. But on the retrograde, it will be exact the end of September. September 25th will be the exact, but that whole end of September, October, beginning of October, we're going to be feeling that Saturn half square to Pluto again. And then it won't be until it resolves and it moves through that by the end of January 2025, we will have a new president, hopefully, already installed. And on January 26th, there will be the 3rd and final Saturn semi-square Pluto. So we will watch those dates as they unfold over the months ahead. Let's move ahead now to the through the 5th and to the 6th. And by the way, even on the 5th, as the moon is moving through Aries, it's going to cross over the nodes and catch up with Mercury, now moving direct and gaining some speed in Aries. But remember, Mercury is still in its shadow, although Mercury entered Aries back in March, around the beginning of spring. I think on March 19th is when Mercury entered Aries, and actually it entered Aries early in March on the 9th. But then on the 18th, right around the beginning of spring, it entered into its shadow, that area where it goes direct, retrograde, and direct. It turned retrograde Mercury turned retrograde on April 1st. It was retrograde for almost all of April, turned direct again on April 25th. But it's now moving direct through that same shadow period. So even though there's movement forward, it's familiar, and we're not out of the mental tanglement, the woods, the weeds, the mental weeds yet. Mercury actually leaves its shadow on May 13th. But Mercury is still moving through Aries. It doesn't leave Aries and enter Taurus until May 15th. So it turns out that Mercury was in Aries. Normally, Mercury can whiz through a sign in 2 weeks, but this was in Aries for 2 months. And so we have this whole sense of the mind really moving, a lot going on mentally. And then by the middle of the month, the Mercury moves into Taurus. Meanwhile, we have Venus having moved into Taurus, but coming back here to May 5th and May 6th, what's important is that on the 5th, as the moon is moving through Aries, it's highlighting all of that Aries stuff. We also have Mercury moving toward a conjunction with Chiron. Remember, Mercury already joined up with Chiron direct and retrograde, and now it's doing it for the third and final time on the evening of May 6th. Let's move this ahead to the 6th, and we can see that Mercury is just ready to catch up to Chiron. It will be on the other side of Chiron by the 7th, and we can also see here on the 6th that Saturn is now perfecting that semi-square to Pluto, and that is perfected actually at just before 5 a.m. on the 6th. That's, again, Pacific time. Also, though, on the 6th, the Sun is actually forming a sextile with Saturn, the Sun just moving towards 17 degrees. By evening, by late night, the Sun makes that sextile to Saturn, making whatever it is that's occurring on Monday, May 6th, not only very stressful because of the perfection of the Saturn semi-square to Pluto, but also the sextile of the Sun to Saturn is really what it's doing is it's grounding the energy. Things are happening now that are real, whatever that means, real. And at the same time, we have the moon moving into Taurus at 2:42 p.m. The moon moves into Taurus, and so there's a stabilization going on. And if you'll notice that as the moon moves into Taurus, by the time we get to the 7th, we can see now that we have 5 planets in Taurus, because we have Venus having already entered Taurus and the Sun and the Moon moving toward that new moon, which occurs on the 7th in the evening at 8:21. We'll get to that chart in just a moment. But just seeing that weight of Taurus energy, things are happening that are real, and we're getting this new moon that is actually sextiling Saturn. It's very important because that what's going on now, we're doing it under stress, under duress, but there's something happening that is really fixing things. I say fixing, I don't mean it meaning that you fix something broken. I mean that when it's like in a chemical reaction, you add a fixer that stabilizes whatever it is. It makes something solid. All this energy in Taurus is solidifying things, which can be really good or it can become problematic. We shall see. As we move on from the 7th, on the 8th, the moon moves into Gemini in the afternoon. This is a little bit of foreshadowing. The moon doesn't move into Gemini until 4:20 p.m. Pacific time. But in a way, the moon's movement into Gemini is giving us a little bit of early warning for later in the month when not all the planets, when several of the planets move into Gemini. And in fact, what happens is we're really getting ready for Jupiter's move into Gemini. On May 20th, the Sun moves into Gemini. On May 23rd, Venus moves into Gemini. And then on May 25th, Jupiter moves into Gemini. So the moon's entrance into Gemini today, or on the 8th, in some ways is like a little bit of a blip of like a foreshadowing of, I think, what's going to be occurring over the latter part of this month. And then certainly as Jupiter spends the next year in Gemini, kind of opening up the communication, the learning that is not necessarily about deep philosophical complicated things, but just the information that really kind of changes where it is we're going and what it is we're doing. I think this is a very exciting period of time that is going to bring us into a new way of looking at things and even communicating with one another. That's May 8th. By the 10th, the semisquares are cooking up again, and we have Mars making a half square with Uranus, and Venus making a half square with Neptune. There's a bit of agitation here on the 10th. We also have the moon moving into Cancer, but not until later in the evening, which can internalize energy. But I think that by midday on the 10th, that there's action, there's annoyance, we're motivated, that the semi-squares basically are kind of like, not just like someone kind of like rubbing us the wrong way. It's something that's deep enough that it makes us go into action. It kind of, there's a word I'm looking for. It stimulates a response. It creates an acute response where something happens. And so May 10th, I think, becomes a bit of an action day because it's Mars to Uranus, Mars half square to Uranus. But at the same time, Venus's half square to Neptune kind of covers up what's going on and makes it difficult to know what's going on. By the 13th, we have the moon having moved through Gemini, having moved through Cancer, and it enters Leo early in the morning at 3:36 a.m. But the other thing is that on the 13th, we have another very potent day because the sun moving through Taurus actually catches up with its conjunction to Uranus. Now, remember, prior to this, when planets were connecting with Uranus with Uranus and Jupiter, they were connecting first with Jupiter, opening our awareness, and then with Uranus, making something happen. Now it's just the opposite. We have the sun doing this first, and then we have Venus doing this next. And this is incredibly important because the sun actually makes its conjunction with Uranus on. The sun makes its conjunction with Uranus. Where am I here? On the 13th. Let's move this ahead to the 13th. The sun makes its conjunction with Uranus on the 13th, but it makes its conjunction with Jupiter on the 18th. And so it's almost like something happens, but then we have to learn and grow from it and expand to reach into what this new way of seeing things actually is. In fact, by the same token, we had the Mars making that half square to Uranus back on the 10th, and Mars makes a half square to Jupiter on the 17th. So we see this interplay of something happening and then need to grow into it. And actually, the third and final one of these actions will be that Venus makes a conjunction with Uranus on the 18th, and then it joins up with Jupiter on the 23rd. We'll see each of these as time goes on, but here we can see, and again, in each of these cases, the first connection is with Uranus, and we can see the sun making that conjunction with Uranus on the 13th. Man, this is action. This is breakthrough. This is lightning striking. This is awakening. This is awareness. This is a day that we perhaps shouldn't carry our lighter or matches in the same pocket as something with a fuse on it, because this is a day when the fuse can be lit and when the lightning can strike. And we're getting this throughout this month with not only the Mars half square to Uranus, but then the sun conjuncting Uranus, and then in a couple of days we'll have Venus conjoining Uranus also, but this is on the 13th. I think the saving grace here is that on the 13th we also have Venus now moving into a sextile with Saturn. That does stabilize things, and it does in some way kind of put a weight of responsibility around us. All right, let's move forward to the 15th. We can see now that on the 15th, Mercury moves into Taurus. We now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planets. The moon is moved. Before we had the new moon in Taurus, there were 5 things in Taurus. Now the moon is on by the 15th on into Leo. In fact, later in the day by 4:47, the moon in Leo makes its opening square to the sun. I think we have a bit of dynamic energy here on the morning of the 15th, when the moon is actually squaring Venus, then Uranus, then the sun, then Jupiter, before it actually moves into Virgo later in the afternoon at about 2:32 p.m. to be exact on the 15th. But this is a definite change of energy. We're digging our heels in, and we are in some ways really solidifying things with so much energy in Taurus. And yet the negative side of this is that we can really be just dumb, stupid, stubborn. We can entrench ourselves in something that is not necessarily the healthiest thing for us. But we still have that Mars in Aries working to loosen things up as it is approaching the nodal axis. So we got a number of things going on, making for an interesting mid-month. Remember, we have Mercury having just moved into Taurus. What that means is that Mercury, following what Venus did at the beginning of the month, Mercury is making a square to Pluto, and that exact square is on the early morning of the 17th. That Mercury actually makes its exact square to Pluto, and once again we have words that are bringing things up that have not been said, things that have been hidden, things are coming out into the open. We still have now Mercury making that square to Pluto, but Saturn is at the half square point to both of those, just like it was earlier in the month with Venus moving through that point. And so there is a complicated energy here as Mercury is making the half square to Saturn. That's exact on the 17th. And also making that half square to making the square to Pluto on the 17th. This is a day when words can create some real problems, some real trouble. The other thing that's happening now is that on the 17th, Mars perfects a half square to Jupiter. Remember, Mars had been making that half square to Uranus. And then into that we have the sun that's going to make a half square to Mars. Also, the sun is moving a little bit quicker out of the way right now, and Mars and the sun are kind of both moving, so it takes a little bit longer for that to perfect. But this is all disruptive. It's complicated because there's stuff going on that we can't. It's almost like the genie out of the bottle, or maybe it's more like opening Pandora's box, and once the energy is out, it can't be put back in. And so this is very complicated energy, and we do have on the 17th not only Mercury square Pluto and Mercury half square Saturn, but we still have the leftovers of the Saturn half square to Pluto. Look, that's still like it's less than a degree, even though it's separating, it's still within a degree of orb. And we also have the Mars half square to Jupiter, which is overinflating and kind of just kind of making things more disruptive. By the 18th, we now have Venus conjoining Uranus, and this can be exciting, but excitement here may be too much. There's a lot going on because by the 18th, not only does Venus join up with Uranus, but the sun joins up with Jupiter. And so we're getting this incredible double whammy, maybe even quintuple whammy of Taurian energy, and Venus lining up with Uranus, Venus being at home in Taurus. She's carrying the energy here. And I think we may see the warrior side of Venus standing up for her values and what's important. And perhaps even those values may have a lot to do with money. We may see some funding issues kind of coming to light here and some craziness through this period of time as Venus is moving through Taurus and aligning with Uranus, and then eventually will also catch up and conjoin Jupiter just on the 23rd. These are powerful days. So that's May 18th. On the 18th, we also have, that's Saturday the 18th, we have the moon moving into Libra, just very early in the morning at 3:22 a.m. On the 19th, we have the sun perfecting an exact sextile to Neptune, the sun getting ready to change signs. It does that early tomorrow morning on the 20th, but on the 19th, it's sextile to Neptune. Again, it makes it hard to know what's going on. I mean, the good news is here that the poets, the dreamers, the musicians, those who are the visionaries can really do some serious work now, and especially as the sun changes signs and moves into Gemini, and it will do that tomorrow on the 20th. Let's actually move to the 20th. And on the 20th, you can see here that the sun now by noon is at 0 degrees of Gemini. It actually entered Gemini at 6 a.m., 5:59 actually a.m., and now we can see another piece of something developing, and that is, although the sun is still sextiling Neptune, even though it's now, disassociative, it's out of modality. It's no longer polarity, earth to water. But now that the sun is in Gemini, it's still by noon, it's still, sextile, less than a degree of orb to Neptune, but it's now closing in on a trine to Pluto that is exact on the morning of the 22nd. But we have the sun now that's both making the sextile to Neptune and a trine to Pluto, giving us the potential to use language to communicate, to have movement into what I'm considering to be the future. Now, we also see that Jupiter is inching closer and closer to its exact sextile to Neptune, which is exact on the 23rd. We'll get there in a moment. But then as it moves into Gemini, it'll make that trine to Pluto that I talked about at the beginning. So these are just, the amount of change and movement that's occurring here is breathtaking. And it's going to be powerful for everyone, and it's going to seem like we've been through enough change, and yet the change now that's happening is really setting things into motion that are going to be with us for quite a while. So the sun moves into Gemini on the 20th. The moon moves into the sun moves into Gemini, but the moon moves into Scorpio, also on the 20th at 3:34 p.m. So a very powerful day, and by the end of the day, we're settling into so we have our perspective. We're not going to be moved. We're heading toward a full moon, and the full moon is on the 23rd, which I think is going to be a very profound day. We'll get there in just a moment. That's the 20th. On the 21st, the sun now at 1 degree of Gemini is making an exact half square with Mars. And again, these are the, the drums of war. These are is the anger. This is the flaring of that Mars and Sun. Mars in Aries. Mars in Aries, it's hot to trot. It's ready to go. And it's half square to the Sun in Gemini, it can kind of ease its path, which on one hand can be really good for establishing boundaries, but on the other hand, it just depends who is establishing those boundaries. So this is an important period of time. By the 22nd, the Sun, which already on the 21st is really close to trining Pluto, by the 22nd, that Sun trine Pluto is exact, and this is basically knowing how to be assertive, but especially when it comes to getting something done. In other words, there's times when we assert ourselves. We got that Sun half square to Mars, and this is about, explosive, overstating the boundaries, especially with the Sun still so close to its conjunction, not only to Jupiter, but Venus coming into its conjunction with Jupiter. There's a lot of overinflationary energy going on here. But the Sun's trine to Pluto basically says, yeah, but let's go deeper and get something done. Let's actually communicate, Gemini, with vitality and illumination, the Sun, in a way that's deeply profound and transformational, Pluto, in the sign of Aquarius, that having to do with the collective, not the individual. So this, I think, is a very powerful time for potential change. And we also have, during the same time, we have the moon on the 23rd moving into Sagittarius. And by the way, the Sun's trine to Pluto is exact at 8:13 a.m. I mean, it will be with us the day before, the day of, the day after, and then some. But by the 23rd, we now have the full moon in Sagittarius. The moon enters Sagittarius on Thursday the 23rd at 1:24 a.m. And the moon is full at 6:53 a.m. Pacific time, and that moon is full at 2 degrees of Sagittarius and 55 minutes. You can think 3 degrees Sagittarius is close enough. But that is significant because it is sextile to Pluto while the Sun is trining Pluto. What that means is, if you think of the full moon opposing the Sun, which all full moons do, Pluto is at the point of Thales, that point on an opposition, which is sextile. Pluto is sextile to the moon on one side of the opposition, and trine, Pluto is trine the Sun on the other side of the opposition, and Pluto becomes the release valve. It becomes the planet that reduces the pressure, or actually it's not pressure, it's tension, because whenever you have an opposition, you have those two planets, the Sun and the Moon, pulling in opposite directions, and Pluto is taking some of the energy out of that equation, reducing the tension of this full moon. Incidentally, I should also note that on the full moon day, on not only is the moon full, but this is the day that Venus leaves Taurus and enters Gemini. And this is, again, we're getting a loosening of the energy, because in Taurus, that energy is pretty tightly bound in whatever its obstinacy is and whatever its position is. And Venus in Gemini, again, opens our ability to see things in a little bit wider mode, especially as that Venus moves towards the trine to Pluto, which is exact on the 25th. This is all important stuff. But here on the 23rd, Venus moving into Gemini, we also have Jupiter which is still in Taurus. Remember, Jupiter will move into Gemini in just a couple of days. But Jupiter is making an exact sextile in its anaretic degree of Taurus. This is unstable energy. Jupiter is making a sextile to Neptune, and Jupiter and Neptune are arguably the same planet from different perspectives. Jupiter has to answer to Saturn. It has to be logical. It has to be rational. It's an opinion, but it has to justify it to the structure, to Saturn. Neptune, on the other hand, has escaped. It's beyond Saturn. And so in a way, Jupiter and Neptune are both expansive, but the sextile between Jupiter and Neptune gives the ability to the vision. It gives the ability for the visionary to have a vision that actually moves beyond the normal bounds of Saturn. Saturn here is weakening a bit. It's still in the picture, of course, especially since Mars is moving into a half sextile, a semisextile with Saturn over the next couple of days. But I think what's significant here, actually that's exact on the 24th, but I think that the potential of the 23rd and of this full moon is huge. And in some ways, this will be, I don't want to say it'll be the loudest day of the month, but it will be the coming it'll be the high tide, both emotionally, but also from the potential of what it is that is occurring, and that is all on the 23rd. As we move on beyond that, on the 24th, we have the moon moving through Sagittarius. As such, it's going to be squaring the Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. There's a bit of difficult energy there, but it's going to be trining Mars, which gives us some movement, some fluidity. I think that we'll see movement on Friday, but it's important to note here that Venus is, even though the sun is moving away from the trine to Pluto, Venus is like coming in right behind it, and then Jupiter will come in behind that, and even Mercury then, but not until June. What we're seeing here on the 25th, let's move this ahead to the 25th. We can see that the moon moves into Capricorn on Saturday morning, and it does that at 8:35 a.m. The important thing here on the 25th is that we have the exact Venus trine Pluto. And this really deepens our resolve. But again, I think we can get things done. On the 25th, we also have later in the afternoon, you can see here that in the morning or at noon, Jupiter is still at 29 degrees and 58, 59, not quite 60 minutes, which will be 0 degrees of Gemini. That occurs at 4 o'clock, 4:14 p.m. But we also see that Mercury is making a half square with Neptune, and Mercury's half square with Neptune is kind of another round of misleading, confusing stuff. We're getting this back and forth here between kind of breakthroughs and, geez, I'm not certain, and wow, this is going to deep and powerful, and something's happening, and what's really going on? This seems to be a theme of these times, but certainly of May, and on the 25th, as Jupiter moves into Gemini, we'll have a lot more to say about that in the June forecast, and even in the mid-month update for those of you who received that, because Jupiter moving into Gemini is really going to open us up. It's going to, for better and or for worse, because it creates movement. It makes opportunities easier to grasp, but it doesn't necessarily make them easier or more sure that we will bring that opportunity to a fruition or conclusion. So there's definitely movement that we're feeling at the end of the month. And as we move on to the 26th, we have the moon moving through Capricorn, actually making a square to Mars now, so there is some disruptive energy there. Making a trine, we're getting that combination of squares and trines here, and making a trine to Mercury and Uranus and Taurus, kind of giving us a bit of stability, even though we're prompted to do something impulsively. By the 27th, the sun now is making a half square to Chiron. In fact, we have Venus right behind the sun coming into making a half square to Chiron too, while we have Mars coming into joining up with Chiron. This is about old wounds. The month closes with a lot of Chironic energy. The sun's half square to Chiron on the 27th is going to shine light on those things that are not going to resolve. We have something that we need to learn, whether we want to learn it or not. Thankfully, we have Mercury on the 27th also making a sextile with Saturn. We're getting some grounded energy here. We have the moon the moon moving into Aquarius just after noon. On Monday, the 27th, the moon will move into Aquarius just before 2 o'clock, 1:44 p.m., and then it will not only conjoin Pluto, but on Monday afternoon, the moon is going to trine Jupiter, and then by Monday night and on through the late hours of the night and early morning, the moon on the 28th, the moon will trine Jupiter and Venus and the sun as it moves on through its run in Aquarius. So we're definitely getting some depth, intensity, and some movement here on the 27th. As we move forward onto toward the 28th, we can see the moon moving through Aquarius, past its trines to the sun and Venus, but also moving toward a sextile to Mars. There's still action going on here, but it's really on the 29th when Venus makes a half square to Mars and Chiron, while Mars is joining up with Chiron. This is another round of the wound coming to the surface, of meeting a block, of having to overcome some pattern that has something to do with the past. The past is coming round. It's like in our face. We have to deal with it. There's not an easy way to resolve this, but we have to figure out something because we have to move through this. And on the 29th, the moon also moves into the moon moves into Pisces, where it was at the beginning of the month. And as it does that, the moon is going to make another round of conjunctions with Saturn and Neptune before moving into Aries late in the evening on the 31st. But as we get to the 30th, we can see not only that the moon is in mid-Pisces, 10 degrees of Pisces, midday on Thursday the 30th, but what we're also seeing now is that Mercury is now catching up with Uranus. This is not exact until 10:53 p.m., but for all practical purposes, Mercury aligning with Uranus in Taurus is kind of giving us, we're going to state in a way like lightning striking or be struck with an awareness of some information that's going to be grounded. We're not going to be able to just shake it off easily. And yet at the same time, Jupiter in Gemini is inching closer and closer to its trine with Pluto. And that trine, as I mentioned earlier, is not exact until the beginning of June. The exact trine is on June 2nd, June 3rd. But we're going to be feeling that already. And so we have the spark of the Mercury, which is the communicator. Remember, Mercury is electricity and Uranus is the nervous system. The nervous system requires the spark of electricity to drive the electricity that's distributed through the nervous system. And so we're having something here that's like an awakening, and yet at the same time, Jupiter coming into that trine to Pluto, we're not going to be able to go back. We're learning something here, and these things are kind of being seeded in a way that is going to be important, I think. And again, I said at the very opening that a lot of what's going on in April kind of sets the tone with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction for the Pluto in Aquarius. And then as the planets move into Gemini and trine Pluto in Aquarius, even though it's retrograde, again, it's still it's barely moved a degree for the entire month. I mean, not even that. It's barely moved. It's barely moved a 1/10 of a degree in the entire month of May, and so all these planets connecting up with Pluto is very crucial, because remember, these are setting up events not only that will be important when Pluto dips back into Capricorn in September, October, November, and then back into Aquarius in December, but also over the years ahead when Uranus, following in a much slower wave, moves out of Taurus and into into Gemini. This is going to be incredibly important, because Uranus will actually move into Gemini in about a year down the road, in June, July of 2025. And as it does, it will then begin a several-year run of its trine with Pluto that will be incredibly important. We'll talk more about that as things unravel or unravel and then re-entangle and re-ravel over the months and even years ahead. Extraordinary times as we think about the month. Coming into the month, there's just so much dynamic transition and change. It's just, again, it boggles the mind. On the other hand, there's potential for real movement here, but we have to do something about it. And with that stated, I bow my head with utmost respect to those people who are putting their comfort on the line in one way or another, standing up for what they believe to be important as we move through this period of time. And again, I know some of these things touch very, very deep, and people have very strong beliefs that are part of their value structures, especially because we have this alignment in Taurus that we're still working on, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. But there's this sense of something is happening that is setting the tone for an awakening, an opening, a movement into a future, whether you like it or not. Things are moving in a new direction. And that direction may not be new in as much as you can see foreshadowings back 100 years. But the fact, or even more, but the fact is that something's happening now that's akin to what was going on back in the late 1700s, around the time of the American and French revolutions. And no one at that time could have imagined how huge those transitions would have been over the centuries that followed. And I would suggest that the same thing is happening now, especially since Pluto's move into Aquarius in some ways is tickling, is foreshadowing, is resonating to the larger, deeper changes that we can't even begin to imagine of what the Aquarius age will bring over the centuries and even the millennia ahead. That's it for now. This has been an intense one, and I hope that we all have the courage to act locally in a way that is resonant with the cosmos. Because if we don't act in resonance with our cosmic thinking, then I think we're going to end up, and I hate to say this, getting what we deserve. You know, karma can be an amazingly wonderful and powerful thing for the good, or it can be something really, really difficult. And I think that it'll take months, even years, even decades to fully unfold. But we are in a time of karma ripening, and more than ever, and I feel like a repeating record, think cosmically, act locally, and yet be safe. I'm Rick Levine. Peace to all of us.